An impenetrable shroud of darkness had fallen over the entire arena, so absolute that it felt less like an absence of light and more like a physical presence. The roaring, fever-pitch energy of the crowd vanished, replaced by a collective, breathless silence that was somehow louder than any cheer. In that void, anticipation crackled through the air, a tangible, living current of electricity that promised a paradigm shift. For a handful of seconds that stretched into eternity, silence was the only sovereign. Then, a single, incisive spotlight slashed through the blackness, its stark, ghostly beam illuminating the ring like a sacred altar. This was the trigger. The audience erupted not in cheers, but in a deafening, primal roar, a sound that seemed to emanate from a place of deep, instinctual understanding. They knew, on a fundamental level, that they were not just spectators but witnesses to history being violently rewritten before their eyes. At WWE Crown Jewel 2025, the foundations of the WWE Universe were not just shaken, they were shattered. In a moment of breathtaking treachery, Paul Heyman, the legendary architect, the silver-tongued strategist, the manipulative genius who had stood as the unwavering consigliere to Roman Reigns for years, executed a betrayal so profound it felt like the decade's most shocking act. This was not a crime of passion or a sudden, impulsive turn. It was a surgical, cold, and meticulously calculated execution, years in the making. Heyman did not merely turn his back on the tribal chief, he systematically dismantled him, piece by piece, with a psychological precision that left the once untouchable God King broken and dethroned in the very kingdom they had built together. The WWE Universe has a long memory of betrayals, but none carry the emotional devastation or symbolic weight of this. Heyman's turn was more than the collapse of a friendship, it was the implosion of an empire from within. Roman Reigns, the self-proclaimed head of the table, the man who had dominated the WWE landscape for years with an iron fist, had finally met his reckoning. And the instrument of his downfall was not a rival, but his own creator. For years, the alliance of Reigns and Heyman was the most dominant and symbiotic force in professional wrestling. They were a perfect, terrifying symphony, Heyman's brilliant, calculating mind conducting Reigns' unadulterated, devastating brute force. Heyman spoke the world into existence, Reigns enforced its reality. Together, they forged the bloodline, a dynasty that crushed every challenger, redefined the very concept of loyalty, and elevated Reigns to a mythic, almost supernatural status. But like all empires that believe themselves eternal, this one carried the latent seeds of its own destruction. By 2025, the fissures were no longer hidden. The bloodline was no longer a united front but a fractured family, splintered by ego, exhaustion, and simmering ambition. The Usos had drifted, their bond frayed. Solo Sikoa operated with a detached, unsettling silence. And Roman himself seemed different, heavier with the crown, slower in his movements, more burdened by the very legacy he had created. The invincible aura was fading, revealing the man beneath the myth. And Paul Heyman saw it all. He is a man who senses the first, almost imperceptible wobble in a throne. He can smell the scent of decay on the wind of dominance. Instead of shoring up the foundations, he began quietly preparing to seize the cornerstone for himself. The warning signs were there for those who knew how to look. The subtle hesitation in Heyman's voice during promos, the way his gaze from ringside had shifted from admiration to cold, clinical analysis, the fleeting, glacial glint in his eye whenever Roman demanded the loyalty Heyman had already mentally revoked. The wise man's silent rebellion had already begun. The entry of Bronson Reed into the narrative was the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Reed represented a raw, unrefined, and hungry power, the same primal energy that had once defined Roman Reigns but had been polished and perhaps diminished under the weight of leadership and expectation. In Reed, Heyman saw what he no longer saw in Reigns, a blank slate of pure, evolving chaos. The betrayal was not born of hatred, but of a cold, Darwinian survival instinct. Paul Heyman has always been a parasite of power, attaching himself to the strongest organism, from Brock Lesnar to CM Punk to Roman Reigns, feeding on their dominance, and abandoning them the moment they showed a hint of vulnerability. Roman's empire was collapsing, and Heyman, the ultimate opportunist, had already laid a new foundation upon the shoulders of a different kind of monster. The brutal ambush by Bronson Reed at Clash in Paris, which left Roman battered and broken, was dismissed by many as a mere plot point. In reality, it was the prelude, the opening act of Heyman's masterpiece of manipulation. When Roman returned weeks later, attempting to resurrect the old spirit by standing with the Usos on Raw, it was a fleeting moment of hope. But the truth was far darker. His family was fractured beyond easy repair, and the empire had become a burden too heavy for even his broad shoulders to bear. Crown Jewel became his final battlefield and his execution ground. From the opening bell, the match transcended the physical, it was a brutal theater of psychological warfare. Reed unleashed a storm of unadulterated brutality, but Roman fought with the desperate, defiant pride of a king refusing to be toppled. Every spear, every Superman punch was fueled by a lifetime of dominance. Yet, amidst the chaos of shattered tables and the crack of kendo sticks, the camera kept finding Paul Heyman. He wasn't cheering or directing, he was pacing, his hands clasped, his face an emotionless mask, his eyes as cold and distant as a winter sky. The tension built to an unbearable crescendo. Then, it snapped. The betrayal was executed with chilling efficiency. As a bloodied and exhausted Roman cornered Reed, poised to deliver a final, victorious blow, Heyman slid a steel chair into the ring, not to his tribal chief, but to his enemy. The collective gasp from the crowd was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Roman turned, his eyes locking with Heyman's in a silent, desperate plea for an explanation that would never come. Then came the sound that will echo through history, the sickening crack of steel against bone. Reed drove the chair into Roman's skull with ruthless precision. The tribal chief collapsed. The referee's count to 3 was a funeral dirge for an era. The most dominant reign in modern WWE history was over. Heyman stepped calmly into the ring, his demeanor chillingly serene. He raised Bronson Reed's hand, anointing the new champion, the new apex predator. In that moment, the world understood this was not a betrayal conceived in a day, but an empire meticulously deconstructed by the very architect who built it. The wise man had become the executioner. Later, Heyman's voice, quiet yet dripping with venom, echoed through the hushed arena, "Loyalty is not eternal. Power is." 6 words that cut deeper than any blade, ending one epic and brutally birthing another. Online, the digital world erupted in instantaneous chaos. Fans debated, mourned, and theorized, comparing the moment to the most legendary betrayals in wrestling lore. Some called it the ultimate poetic justice for a man who believed himself a god, others saw it as a heartbreaking end to a legendary partnership. But all consensus agreed on one thing: this was a moment forever etched in history. Paul Heyman didn't just betray Roman Reigns, he rewrote the very definition of loyalty, replacing faith with cold strategy and family with ruthless survival. And in Bronson Reed, standing tall and arrogant beside his new mentor, he found a perfect vessel. Reed's declaration of himself as the tribal thief was more than a mockery, it was a coronation of a new, brutal ideology. Yet, the story is far from over. Because as Roman Reigns lay broken in the center of the ring, there was something in his eyes far more terrifying than rage, the chilling, focused calm of a man reborn in the fires of hatred. WWE masterfully blurred the lines between fiction and reality, weaving in Reigns' real-life admissions of burnout and exhaustion, allowing the man's truth to fuel the myth's downfall. This fusion is what made the narrative so profoundly impactful. It didn't feel scripted, it felt inevitable. Roman had carried the company for years, and the weight had finally crushed him. But every fallen king creates a deeper, darker hunger. The bloodline may lie in ruins, but Roman's story is not concluded. The Usos are divided, Solo Sikoa stands in the shadows, and Heyman has built a new empire on borrowed time. For somewhere in the darkness, Roman Reigns is no longer a leader, but a hunter. When he returns, it will not be for gold or glory. It will be for vengeance. Paul Heyman believes he has rewritten history, but all he has truly done is awaken a sleeping storm. Crown Jewel 2025 wasn't just the night a champion lost his title, it was the night the world learned that even gods can bleed. And when this dethroned deity rises again, he will not come to reclaim his throne. He will come to burn the entire kingdom of betrayal to the ground. This is not the end. It is the beginning of the reckoning.